Welcome to episode 3 of Drug Free Australia's Injecting Room Scams series. I'm Gary Christian. I'm the Research Director for Drug Free Australia. And in this episode, we will be looking at reducing public nuisance. Injecting rooms claim that they will create less public nuisance out on the streets. That's less public injecting, less discarded syringes in public places. There will be no increases in open drug dealing, drug users congregating in one area, no increases in drug-related crime, or increased feelings that the area is unsafe. Now, looking at the Sydney facility, which is directly opposite the King's Cross station entrance, we can see from this 2003 report, the first report that was done on the injecting room, that on page 146 over here, that the police note a correlation of loitering with injecting room opening hours. They also said that there had never been a problem with drug dealing at the station before that. Local businesses reported continual drug dealing near the injecting room, and there was a doubling of drug-related loitering at the injecting room back door. On page 147, the police say, look, it's a morning task for us due to more congregating near the train station. We have to move them along. But the evaluators, they concluded on page 27, the available evidence does not suggest that there was a large increase in drug-related loitering in King's Cross following the injecting room opening. The Sydney injecting room opened in May 2001, which was 6 months after the commencement of the heroin drought, which affected the whole of Australia. In this report over here, report number 4 in 2007, the evaluators, and government funded of course, said that they had found a 50% decrease in discarded needles and syringes. Let's look at what happened with the Australian heroin drought. What we can see over here is Australian opiate deaths at their peak in 1999, bottoming out in the year 2001, the year that the injecting room opened, and then holding at about 360 deaths per year for the next 7 years. What also happened was that there was a 70% reduction, along with the opiate deaths, in heroin user numbers, and this was the case in King's Cross as well. We should fully expect that there would be a large decrease in discarded needles and syringes. Did the government-funded evaluators say anything about the heroin drought when they were looking at these numbers? Not a word. When we go to Melbourne, they did not have a heroin drought that they could rely on. And their report was from 2020. And in the local papers, there had been a lot of stories about the increased numbers of dealers in the area around this safe injecting room. And one lady, Elizabeth Street resident, said it's a honeypot effect. They're moving in and they're setting up shop outside the injecting room where they know they've got a guaranteed market. All of that was backed up by the Victorian Police, and this is from their very own website. This text that you see here is copied directly off it. And their survey of their own police officers said that nearly 80% of police members surveyed did not think that the trial of the injecting room was working well from a policing perspective. In the government-funded review of 2020 of the medically supervised injecting room in Melbourne, they actually had to be honest because all of the indicators were bad. And on page 85, they said that the finding of this review is that amenity, that is reduced public nuisance, has not improved during the review assessment period. At least we got an honest assessment. Moving to Vancouver's Insight, a 2004 government-funded evaluation, which you can see over on the right-hand side of your screen, looked at what had happened with public nuisance since the centre had opened the year before in September of 2003. What they found was decreases in public injection drug use, publicly discarded syringes here, and injection-related litter. But we have to ask the question, is it the injecting room which is making the difference, or is it something else? And one thing about these evaluations, government-funded, by this particular group of researchers is that they never reference something which is very important, and that is that there was more than a tripling of police numbers 6 months before Insight opened. And it's been maintained, I understand, until this day. So their numbers moved from 20 to 65, and that 65 police officers plus commanding officers above that number were looking after an area around Insight. These 12 blocks is where they concentrated their work. At the same time, there was a change in policing ideology and methodology, if you like. Up until that time, at 2003, they had had a policy of containment, as you will see within this government-funded evaluation. But then in 2003, 6 months before the injecting room opened, they changed to a zero-tolerance strategy where they sought to actively disrupt the open drug market in the area around Insight and to restore order to the same community. What was the effect of the change policing? Interestingly enough, we have a study that was done the year after and published in a medical journal. Interesting to note who the authors were. You might want to take note of that. But this study was a complaint about the policing and what it was doing to drug users. And it was describing that there was quite a level of displacement of injecting drug use from the area of the crackdowns that were happening into adjacent areas of the city. Now, what does displacement mean? What, we should ask, moved away from the area around Insight? First of all, we can be pretty sure that drug dealers had to move on to avoid arrest, go to another suburb. Drug users, to find the drugs from their dealers, had to follow them. And with the users, of course, went their discarded needles, because drug users shoot up straight after they buy heroin from a dealer. Public injecting went elsewhere as a result. So did their crime. So did their overdoses, because if they're shooting up once they've just done a deal, that is when they're most likely to overdose. And so did the overdose deaths. They went elsewhere to other suburbs. So going back to a study that we looked at in the previous episode on saving lives, there was a claim in a study by Lancet in 2011 that Insight had reduced deaths in its immediate area around it by 35%. And you can see why there was a 35% reduction in deaths. It was due to the policing, interestingly enough. Who was it who authored that study? Have a look at those names and see if they are familiar. And of course, the Lancet authors claim in this study in Lancet 2011 that they had no knowledge whatsoever of any policing changes that might have reduced those overdose deaths. They say within this 2011 study, additionally, we know of no changes in policing policy that could have confounded our results. Yet they were the very ones who were complaining about the policing changes in a previous study. Next episode, we'll be looking at referral to treatment.